right, so we'll be live now.
Is it going?
I can see it. And me.
I can see it too, but it looks
You see it in the IHAN page?
I do. It looks like there's a little bit of a lag time.
Yeah, there's always a lag.
Okay.
All right, here comes Ladina.
Hi.
Hi.
I made it. It was like a marathon mission.
I knew you'd make it.
Barely. I was like, we have to go. So, what's everyone going to talk about?
We're live on Facebook right now.
We are.
We are.
Oh, good. 5 minutes early.
Yeah, I wanted to give everybody the opportunity to share it to their personal pages or their business pages. So, we start a little bit early. And I'm just sharing it to my page right now. So I have to shut down my Facebook or else I'm going to hear that the whole time. Okay. Right, so I think it's all shared. I will monitor anybody who posts any comments from my phone. So I'll let you guys know if people are asking any questions or anything.
Great.
Cool. And we'll start in 5 minutes.
I forgot my t-shirt. Just
I will monitor anybody who... Yeah, you'll want to pause or mute your phone. So I'll let you guys know if people are asking any questions or anything. And we'll start in 5 minutes.
If people have other things open, I'm getting a delay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Kim is sharing it to her page. So as soon as she shares it, she can close it down and then we won't hear the...
Perfect.
There we go.
My cat's probably going to join us.
It's so strange because it'll be interesting to do this and see it here in a lag time and answer people's questions. Have fun.
That does not sound very fun.
It's just a lot. So, you know, it's kind of like being at a shelter, you know, when we're doing our normal response. It's lots of things going on all over the place. So
I don't have a shirt. I need a shirt. And
yes, I know somebody who can get you a shirt.
Yeah, I can get you one. we'll figure out a way to drop it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A drive by, throw it out the window.
Exactly. We'll get like one of those t-shirt cannons.
All right. Wait a few more minutes. And if anybody has the live on their phone right now through their Facebook, you can invite people, like share it directly to people as well. If there's people that you told about the event.
The cat is losing his mind.
Okay.
All right, I'll put that over there. How's everybody's day? Oh, you're muted, Mary.
There we go.
There you are.
It's good. It's a beautiful day for another Zoom meeting.
Yeah, I think I'm on Zoom number 5 right now.
Oh, gosh.
Wow.
Today.
Yeah.
A lot of screen
Oh,
time.
yeah, I guess me too. Technically, I'm on Zoom number 4.
My number 2.
This is what our lives have become.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why I'm outside.
Yeah. Good. Good thinking. Fresh air.
So important.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you all taking time out of your day to help with this. It's such an interesting time for everyone. So incredible to me when I say everyone, like everyone, like not a single person that this isn't affecting in the world. And, you know, I'm so grateful for all of you for donating your time to IHAN and our mission to transform trauma into resiliency. As you all know, we've been focusing primarily on fires in California, and this is such a different disaster. And so we came together as an organization and just said, you know, we have so many tools around trauma and resilience that we really need to share them in some way. And so thank you for all pivoting with us as we kind of take our response virtual, which actually is incredible because, you know, we can help so many more people now that we can offer some tools this way. So I'm excited that we were able to pull this together. And this is our first event in our Resiliency Summit. And we'll be doing these panels weekly, today starting with trauma and having a different topic each time we meet with different practitioners. So maybe you guys can go through and introduce yourselves and just explain kind of what you do. And we'll start with Kim.
Okay. I'm Dr. Kim. I'm an acupuncturist and doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. I also do a lot of meditation and help people with meditation instruction. I work in Marin. And I do a lot of mental health and emotional wellness, stress management type of work in my practice. So kind of really tying in that body, mind, and spirit connection.
Great. And Mary.
Hi, I am Mary Johnston. I'm a classical homeopath. I have a practice in San Francisco, and I mostly just do homeopathic consultations, and it can range from everything from acute to chronic conditions. And it's a family practice that I have, so seeing people of all ages in all different places of their life, and certainly right now, a lot of trauma, anxiety, and different manifestations of coping with this time.
Great, well, thank you. And Jenny.
Hi, I'm Jenny Harrow. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Integrative Healers Action Network. And we formed the organization in 2017 during the 2017 Sonoma County fires, which is where I live. In addition to my work with IHAN, I'm also an integrative health coach. I'm a nature therapy guide. I bring a lot of work of sharing mind-body medicine tools and using nature connection as a way to regulate our nervous system and move through stress and anxiety and things like that. So I'm really grateful to be here with you all and chat about this today.
Thank you. And
Hi, I'm Dr. Ladina Jean. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I'm also the naturopathic ambassador for IHAN. I specialize in general wellness, and also a huge part of my practice is devoted to caring for oncology patients. And I do a lot of women's health as well. Huge emphasis on nature cure as well. I'm practicing right now. With a lot of, with our naturopathic focus, we have a lot of tools in the tool book or in the tool chest there. So we have everything from diet and nutrition to supplements to nutraceuticals to prescription medications if we really deem them necessary, to lifestyle modifications, including meditation. We also do homeopathy, and if it's a more complicated scenario that I feel is above me, I refer out for that. Yeah, and I practice here in Sonoma County.
great, thank you so much. So the idea with these panels is to give people an idea around tools that they can use, experiences that you've had that maybe they can kind of connect with. And, in this time, people may not even realize that they're experiencing trauma. So we're hoping that by bringing together this integrative team, we can give different perspectives from each of your practices, tools that you use. So this will be a really informal discussion just around your thoughts around trauma and resiliency. I'll have a few questions that I'll ask throughout, but if you want to just, we can start with Kim. And if you want to just talk about what trauma looks like in your practice, the types of people that you see, and we're really looking for tools for people to apply to their lives right now, or the ability to even look within and see kind of what's going on with them and what might need to be addressed. And yeah, just really informal. If you have case studies that you want to share where you had really big breakthroughs, that would be great. And then if anybody wants to kind of chime in throughout that process, if you're just, inspired by something she says, go ahead and feel free to join in.
Awesome. Thank you. I was thinking about this, and what is really cool about Chinese medicine is that kind of once we have a base understanding, there's a lot of different ways that we can practice. So each practitioner is going to vary a lot in how we approach different things. I work a lot on the spiritual level. So in Chinese medicine, we have 5 spirits in the body. So the Shen, the Hun, the Po, the Yi, and the Zhi. And each of them are connected to the different elements and different organ systems. And they're a good way of addressing and describing mental health and emotional states is with these 5 spirits. And what's not necessarily cool about them, but I find fascinating is that they're very sensitive spirits. So we kind of get these, some of them come in before we're born, and then some of them come in after, and we develop them over time. What happens to us in our childhood affects how we kind of hold on to them, and we call it I call it a divergence, but it's also just like a leaving of the spirits, and the imagery is like a little bird sitting in a tree. And so the spirit is that little bird sitting in the tree, and it kind of, any disruption, that bird's going to fly away. And when it does, we get other symptoms and things that start to show up. So any kind of trauma or disruption, we're having a huge disruption right now, is those different spirits that we have are kind of coming in and out. And it's really obvious, I find, when someone's in a very obvious trauma, like a car accident. When someone goes into shock, you can kind of really get a good picture of what someone's like when those 5 spirits kind of all take off at the same time. And we use treatments to help kind of call that spirit and that part of ourself back again. And that's what brings us back to center and gets that whole feeling happening again. And I think it's important to remember that it's like trauma doesn't have to be something crazy. It's not like like the car accident, obviously, or something really severely physical happening is like the most used definition of trauma that we have, but it happens on such subtle levels and it's different for everybody. So it's not this comparison of, oh, somebody has it worse than I do, I'm not allowed to feel bad about this or be in a different state. We're all kind of experiencing this on our own level with our own different manifestations. For some, it's just a disruption in routine. For others, it's, losing our homes possibly, or losing our businesses and our work. So it's very variable, but that doesn't mean that it's not important for each person in their own way. So I just wanted to say too, that we could remember that depending on locations, like licensed healthcare providers, even if they're acupuncturists or naturopaths, like are still part of that essential workers. So some of us are still open, and seeking out a treatment is totally allowed and acceptable for you to do, because part of the goal of that is to keep you out of going to the doctor's office. So if someone's having a severe anxiety or panic attacks or things like this, we might be able to get somewhere with an acupuncture treatment or other types of modalities without having to go into the doctor's office and kind of tax that.
Great. And on that, I'll add that Integrative Healers Action Network is going to be having a virtual free clinic on Thursdays between 2 and 4 p.m. Pacific time. And so that's another great opportunity for people to be able to access providers like yourselves to do some of that work remotely.
Yeah. And at-home tools and things that we can do, or that I would suggest for people who are having some issues or difficulties with all of this, it's great to work with somebody if you have that opportunity, but not everybody does. And I feel like a lot of these first steps around it are just in acknowledging what's going on, not trying to fight it or push it away, and just accepting that I'm having a really crappy feeling today and being curious about it. And lots of times when we can be curious about things, they start to shift. And that's what I help people work with a lot and especially pain in the body too, where we can, the more we fight it, the more we're going to suffer. Pain's always going to be there. So we can choose to fight it and try to make it go away and get rid of it and go through all these processes, and then we still have it, or it just morphs into something else. Whereas embarking on that more true and holistic healing path, we're turning that pain into something we're curious about and wondering and exploring in a little bit more sense, so that we can still stay true to who we are through that process. Because that's kind of what it's all about right now, is hanging on to our center and our grounding and ourselves in that process. And it just starts with curiosity.
Great. Does anybody want to share their experience around how they focus on trauma with their clients?
I'm happy to jump in. I loved everything you had to offer, Kim. Thanks. It's so true that it's beyond just the modality that we each use, but also, what the relationship we develop with people, and what they can learn from the experience of healing and bring home to take care of themselves. Like hopefully that's what all the healing does is allow you to access your own center, even going forward. Homeopathically, there's kind of two basic tools. One is the homeopathic consult, the conversation. And that is really trying to understand what is the experience, where did the disturbance both happen, and how is this particular human being trying to cope with that disturbance? So whether it's an acute trauma where it's like something physical, or a re-triggering of old traumas, which I think some of the situations that are going on now really bring people back to old fears and anxieties that maybe they were coping with fine, and now there's a new thing to integrate. And so that conversation is really trying to understand that particular person's experience and individualize the homeopathic remedy that is indicated to address that experience and help somebody kind of harmonize and integrate what the coping mechanisms they're using, which sometimes feel very uncomfortable, and really looking at.
For people who don't know what homeopathics are, can you just describe that briefly?
What the remedy itself is?
Well, just homeopathy in general for people who may have never heard of that.
Okay. Homeopathy is a system of medicine that has a number of principles, but the basic one is that like cures like, and that we need to treat the totality of the person before us. And we do that by the homeopathic consult that I mentioned, where you're having basically trying to just listen to the story and where people are right at this moment, what they're experiencing, and match that state, so to speak, that they're in, that picture of how they're trying to cope with a difficult situation of whatever sort, whether it feels physical, mental, or sleep disturbance. There's all kinds of different systems that can go out of whack when we're off, and certainly with trauma. And in trying to match that experience to a remedy that will mirror that experience and basically nudge that immune system, that we have a different word for it, we call it the vital force, but nudge that vital force to heal itself. So it's a vitalistic form of medicine that believes that the body can heal itself, and it sometimes needs an energetic move to do so. And the homeopathics themselves they're made from all sorts of dilutions of substances from nature, everything from animal, mineral, plant, or disease material. And they're made in pharmacies, homeopathic pharmacies.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you.
Jenny, do you want to share what I think your experience using nature is much different. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so my work as an integrative health coach and a nature therapy guide, the program that I did was a master's in integrative health studies, and it was really a crash course in mind-body medicine of all the amazing and variety of tools that we as individuals have to access our own healing and access our inner wisdom and our innate ability to grow and transform with challenges, whether they're physical health challenges, external traumatic challenges. And so a lot of my foundation is, I focus a lot on nature because I think being able to practice mindfulness and practice other meditation techniques in nature is an amazing opportunity for us to evoke that pause, which is, I think, crucial when we're going through any sort of huge change, and right now the world is changing so rapidly. And, and now we're kind of facing this new reality of, okay, we're home all the time. Myself, experiencing things like Zoom fatigue, which is, I think, a really big reality for most people beyond, adults, children, young kids being in front of screens all of the time right now. And I heard an article recently about how, when we're meeting in person, like we're reading each other's body cues, we're feeling other people's energy, you know, and so I think our minds and bodies are kind of on overdrive right now with the whole Zoom thing of like, I'm paying extra attention about what everyone is saying because I can't feel that like heart resonance or that the physical energy that's coming from people. And so I'm just like lasered in. And then there's also the weird thing of like, we're seeing ourselves on screen while we're in these Zoom meetings, which is disorienting because it's not like that in real life. We're not like having this mirror in front of us. And so what I love about nature is that one, it's just a break from all of this. You know, before I got on this call, because we were talking about before we started, like this is Zoom meeting 2, 3, 4, 5 for some of us already, and it's noon here on the West Coast. So you know, I took just 5 minutes to go and sit in my yard, and I put a timer on because I knew that I had to come make this call. And I just sat there and I looked at this beautiful oak tree that's in my yard. And I looked at the roses that are blooming all around. And, you know, we have so many birds here. And so just really taking advantage of, even though, if, you know, everything is so limited in terms of what our ability is to go and to places. Like I'm used to going to the middle of the many forests that we have here in Sonoma County, and the parks have been closed, this whole shelter in place, and now they're starting to reopen slowly, but only to, you can only walk to the places, you can't drive to go to the parks. And so it's like, how can we find nature that is just in our backyard, you know? And that's what I love about when I lead. Yeah, exactly. You know, leading forest bathing walks is like, it's all a practice of awareness, you know. And I love, Mary, that you use the word curiosity, and I think you mentioned that too, Kim, of just being really curious right now. And nature is an amazing place to practice that curiosity, you know. And so when I lead forest bathing walks, you know, I warn everyone, like, we're going to go really slow. It's going to feel kind of uncomfortable at first because we're used to going from point A to point B all the time in life, where it's like, even on our hikes, it was just like, I'm going to hike up to the top of this mountain. And it's like, what if we can approach time in a different way, of not trying to be so linear right now? I mean, we don't know what the future is holding for us in this particular moment, you know, individually and collectively. And so I think just being in this like open, curious place, even if it's just for 5 minutes a day, if we're able, and even if we're in the city, you know, I'm grateful to be living here in Sonoma County and I have a yard and things like that. But I remember the times when I was living in San Francisco or other cities and living in apartments, and it's like, you know, we don't have to be in the middle of a forest to connect to nature. Like there is nature everywhere, because that is, we're living on this planet. There are other animals and trees and plants. And so so taking even just 5 minutes to touch a tree, to smell a flower, to allow ourselves to be kind of in this exploratory space. And I think that nature is such a great teacher for that. And it's sometimes easier than, you know, my meditation practice is a crucial part of my like health and well-being. And especially right now with so much stress and uncertainty, but sometimes like sitting on a mat in silence can be intimidating for people, especially if you're new to it. And so that's what I love about practicing mindfulness in nature, is that you can do walking meditations that are just based in like asking yourself, I'm curious what this tree smells like. And that in itself is a practice of mindfulness, just being open and curious. And so yeah, that's my invitation, is like, even if it's just starting with 5 minutes of giving yourself that kind of unstructured time. Because I think it's also like, I don't know if you guys resonate with this, but like, I feel like life is almost like, oh my God, I have Zoom meeting back to back, and like, there's no breaks in between. And so I think we need to schedule time for ourselves to decompress and to not be in front of a screen, and to to be able to give ourselves space to listen to what's coming up, because there's so many changes. And so listening to our own internal wisdom to be a guide and compass as we're navigating through this challenge.
Thank you so much. Ladina.
Hi, thanks, ladies. That was all really lovely. I'm going to talk about things kind of from a more boring perspective. I'm going to talk about how to recognize some clinical signs and symptoms of trauma, but specifically, what does trauma look like during a pandemic? What does that stress feel like during a pandemic, a global pandemic, epidemic, something that really is focused specifically on health? I consulted a lot of different sources as I was putting together information and trying to really think about what does trauma normally look like, and then how does that transfer into this like global community experience of trauma? How do we treat that at home? How do we treat that as a practitioner? And how do we move forward as a community when this is all over? And also, like, not that I have an answer for this, but a big piece of this is that separation between essential workers, non-essential workers, frontline workers. You know, some of us have been deemed non-essential. We get to stay at home, keep ourselves and our families safe. And then we have frontline workers who knew as a part of their job that it's a bit more risky. And then we have these sort of folks who fall into the middle, who are our grocery workers, our folks who are delivering groceries to our front door, who never really understood that they could potentially be putting their lives at risk to keep our communities and our social structures intact so that we could continue moving forward in the world. So I think that's a piece of the aftermath that we'll have to deal with a little bit. And I'm not sure I have a lot more to say specifically on that yet. It's just kind of a question that I think is coming up a lot in the reading. So, you know, stress during an infectious disease outbreak, I think sort of the consensus is that shifts a little bit to have a lot of fear and worry focused on our own health, but also our health of loved ones. And this is kind of an extraordinarily large amount of time that we might be spending thinking about those things. And I think that might vary based on those groups we were just talking about. Some other big things to think about here, major changes in sleep patterns, major changes in how we're eating. Some of us too much, some of us too little, depending on how that stress really impacts you. Also, you know, difficulty concentrating. So some of us might just really push that to the side and say, well, I can't concentrate from home to work. Well, I really want to urge you to consider that that might just be the stress of how this pandemic is really impacting your life. Another piece here is just worsening of pre-existing health conditions. So whether it's from the stress itself or because you can't get access to the care you might need during this time. And then also another piece there is worsening of mental health conditions, just because of this added level of stress that we're experiencing really as a world, right? The other piece here I want to touch on, because I think it's important, is this is a time where we might really see people increase their use of alcohol, tobacco, and even other drugs. And so this is something to pay special attention to as a person from home, because if you're doing that to cope with the stress and at some point the stress isn't addressed or appropriately treated, this is how you might be left with some level of addiction to face at a later date. And so if you are that person and you are noticing that you're coping by drinking more or increasing other behaviors in that area, it's probably time to really sit down and talk to someone about that now so you can start moving through some of the stress. I also want to talk about some of the physical symptoms we can experience with trauma, stress-related trauma. So some of us experience that as headaches, majorly gastrointestinal upset. We come back to that mind-body connection, right? We feel stressed. Where is the first place we feel that? Our heart center, our gut, that's where we feel that anxiety and that stress. And that often gets, IBS diagnoses. And so it's something to sort of pay attention to. Has that like heightened sense of fight or flight response that we all kind of know about. When that goes on for too long, and at this point it's been a while for us living through this social isolation, it really can start to have negative impacts on the body. So our cortisol, which is our stress hormone, initially it really surges to help us get through these stressful times. And it's a blessing. It's something that really keeps us alert, awake, and helps us respond. And then at some point when things don't settle back down, or we don't learn to cope or have the skills or access to care to help us regain just sort of a better homeostasis in our body, we really start to experience long-term negative effects of having that cortisol elevated for too long. It can impact our blood sugar levels, cause weight gain. It can impact our immune function, which no one wants to have poor immune function right now. And then one of the big factors is if it's gone on for way too long, it can really start to deplete. And then we're left over with this kind of ongoing fatigue that really needs to be addressed with a provider in order to sort of get you out of that space. I also want to talk about a few things we can do at home to help cope with stress. If you're just starting to identify with some of the things that I mentioned, one big thing right now is take a break from the news. Take a break from watching, reading, and listening to the news stories. Take a break from social media. Hearing about the pandemic in every single avenue of our lives all day long, it's just complete overload. And I know for myself at some point, 4 or 5 weeks in, I really had to say, okay, I'm going to check in one time per day so that I'm up to date. I know what's going on, but I can't leave the news on in the background all day anymore. And I strongly suggest that folks really take that to heart. The other piece is, I agree that some of us are probably too structured and in too much routine, but for those of us who aren't, routine can be very helpful when you're home. So even if it's just something as simple as setting up a regular bedtime, a regular wake time, creating a workout regimen so that you've got that exercise in your life, which really helps to balance those stress hormones I alluded to earlier. And then if you're not sleeping well and taking some of these measures really aren't helping, it probably is time for you to seek out someone to talk to. And like Cynthia was mentioning, we're all kind of here during this time, and Dr. Kim as well, we're available, and a lot of us providers are still working through virtual platforms and able to offer insights. This connect with others thing is important. So how do we readjust and think about that during a time of social distancing? I've seen all sorts of cool, creative things folks are doing. From neighborhood dance parties where someone's blaring music out their door and the neighborhood's all social distancing and listening, to same thing with barbecues. I even have friends who are doing drive-by visits. So they'll come by in their car and the person stands at the door and they're just talking and connecting with that human interaction that Jenny mentioned, where you actually get to read someone's face and you're not staring at yourself in a screen the whole time. There's tons of different ways to make that connection, really. I think another piece of this, before I talk too long, I just want to talk about creating resiliency from this type of traumatic experience. And I think some of the other gals will have a lot more to say about this, but it's kind of just building on some of the things that I've already mentioned. And I really want to give a definition here of what I mean. Resiliency has come to mean an individual's ability to overcome adversity and continue with their normal development. And I was reading this doctor, Dr. Michael Unger, Unger, and he said, in the context of exposure to significant adversity, resilience is both the capacity of individuals to navigate their way to the psychological, social, cultural, and physical resources that sustain their well-being, and their capacity as an individual and collectively as a community to negotiate for these resources to be provided in meaningful ways. I really loved that definition. I really resonated with that. And so I'm just going to work through some of the resources that I use. These were the suggestions for really trying to create resiliency for our communities and individuals through a time like this. Back to that connection, reaching out to friends and family, whatever way it is, just being very careful not to isolate yourself, even though that's exactly what we've been told to do during this time. You know, there's ways to do that. Volunteering, we're all doing that right now while maintaining our social distancing. So it's something that can feel very joyful. You know, I've already mentioned this a couple times, and I'm going to mention it again. If the sadness, the grief, the worry, if these things become too overwhelming, it really is a sign that it's time to talk to a professional, to talk about supplements or nutrients or acupuncture or homeopathy, or even getting set up to talk to a clinical therapist online, which I want to make sure everyone realizes is still a resource and is very easily accessible right now. I think Dr. Kim mentioned this, I can't remember who, but don't really avoid how you're feeling. Try to embrace what you're feeling, try to really own it, try to talk about whatever level of comfort you have in discussion with your social network, because what you might find is you're not alone, that other people are really feeling similar things. I also touched on exercise already. I think it's an invaluable piece here. And I want to give some guidelines there. I think, you know, we don't want to always call it exercise. We want to also just refer to it as movement, because if you're not capable of exercising right now, I want you to still feel like moving is important. So gentle stretching, yin yoga, whatever it is you can do, going for a walk. This really helps on a physical way to modify how our body handles and copes with stress. It's not just the mental aspect, it's actually very physical as well. And it helps boost energy levels. Otherwise, if you're fit and you're capable, I really recommend 20 to 30 minutes of exercise at, you know, moderate to vigorous capacity at least 5 days a week. And I heard, Cynthia, that there might be a big list of resources. Has that been uploaded on the website for folks?
Yeah, so Integrative Healers Action Network is going to be providing free content on a daily basis throughout this summit. So it will range from, you know, live classes, yoga, stretching, homeopathy, acupressure, things like that. So there'll be different content every day.
Perfect. Perfect. And now in this day and age, we have so many resources available to us on our smartphones. You know, there are all sorts of exercise apps out there, from yoga specific to bar classes to more aggressive HIIT training. Really explore what there is available and get into a routine at home with your exercise. Don't just wait for the gym to open back up. Lifestyle stuff. I'm going to just touch on it because the other girls have talked a lot about meditation. So that's a big piece. Eating regular healthy meals. We talked about resting and sleep already. And then I want to add another piece that I think gets left out. Do what you love to do, whatever your hobbies are, figure it out during this time, because this is such a wonderful opportunity to indulge in those things that we really love to do as a person. there's all sorts of meditation apps out there. There's all sorts of apps out there to help you sleep better. So explore that if you feel like it's a resource that you need. We already talked about alcohol as well. And I just want to point out, just on a physical level, it can really disrupt sleep. So if you're having a hard time sleeping, try to really start to limit the alcohol in the evenings, because that might be able to help. It's also a depressant. So if you're feeling sad and having a hard time, is probably not a great choice for you right now. We already talked about a lot of these things. And then I wanted to mention too, a big piece here, I think culturally, for us and globally, is that we tend to connect on a really meaningful level through music. And I want to put a reminder out there for folks to, learn to play music, pick an instrument, make sure you're listening to music every day. You can share songs that you're interested in and share music with loved ones. I think this is a really, really important piece to that human connection that we're not able to share face to face right now. I will pause. I have some like indie focus stuff, but let's move on and let other people have.
Yeah. So you mentioned the idea around the frontline workers who didn't realize maybe what their job meant in a situation like this. And, I've read some stories about physicians that are really struggling in New York, working on the front line. And so my question for the panel is, as a disaster worker, what do you think helps those people in a time like this? So what are some tools that frontline workers can put into, maybe like 3 or 4 things? I don't know how much people can really put into action when they're dealing with the crisis kind of face on. But one of the things that IHAN really wants to do during this particular response is to offer our tools specifically to the frontline workers, the healthcare professionals, the people who are really struggling and aren't just sitting at home able to kind of craft and do those things. So what does the panel suggest is like 3 or 4 things that those people could be putting into action? Who wants to start?
I'll chime in. It was funny, this came to me like a little while ago while she was talking also. It's a tough situation because there's not a lot of extra time. We do meditation practices or things that kind of help keep us grounded and here, and it can be really difficult when there's not a lot of time and the job is so exhausting at the same time. So it's like energy zapped, like there's nothing extra in the tank. My cat is having a fit right now. And so when we are in those situations where there isn't the time or the kind of bandwidth for this self-care practices, turning all of the little things or as much as we can into that kind of present practice is really helpful. Okay. And it comes down to maybe saying a prayer before a meal. Just really tapping into that centered, grounded space as much as possible. And that can just be simply tuning into your connection with your feet on the ground. And I like to do this around food because that tends to be like one of the few breaks that they might get in those situations where you have a little bit of time to yourself. And instead of tuning into the phone or even conversations with other people, is just being fully present with the meal that you're having or the drink that you're drinking or whatever's going on there. And, like Jenny talked about with the curiosity of the forest and taking things kind of slowly like that, where you're walking through, we can do that with the meal just as simply. And in that practice, we kind of come back to center and back to present again. And like, it's making the meal be more rejuvenating than just fuel for the body.
That's Great. Thank you so much for that. It's a good reminder that we can always kind of slow down, at least for some small part of the day. And I love that, you know, I'm a nutritionist. And so one of the things that I recommend to my clients is that same thing, is to sit, you know, and depending on if they like the word prayer or gratitude or however it fits for them, but just, you know, thinking about how much it took to get that to them, and just being in gratitude for the hands that touched it, and the people who prepared it, and all of that. Those are all great ways to, you know, because fear and gratitude can't really live in the same place. So I love that, putting gratitude in, you know, even in the hustle and bustle, and being like, you know, straight on with the crisis, being grateful for all of the things that you possibly can be in that moment, I think also are really helpful. So who else has some tools for our frontline workers?
I could jump in. I totally, resonate with everything that Dr. Kim just shared. And I think, you know, time is of the essence for a lot of our frontline workers. And so being able to find like little hacks, you know, like I love the suggestion of incorporating mindfulness and gratitude into eating, and something that's been helpful when we're in, you know, creating our clinics during fires and things like that, and we're, you know, the only breaks that we really get are when we go to the bathroom. I've heard that a lot from my nurse friends and other people who are, they just don't have a moment to even really stop to eat or to go outside. And so, you know, just like pairing, like, all right, I know I'm going to pee at least once or twice a day, which seems to be less when we're working a lot, because we're probably dehydrated. But of taking that moment of like, all right, I'm in a bathroom stall for maybe 60 seconds, and maybe giving yourself a little extra time to do a quick breathing practice. I'm a big fan of the box breathing because it's super simple and effective, of just a simple way to calm our nervous system, you know, breathing in for 4 and pausing for 4, and breathing out for 4 and pausing for 4. And it's shown that even if you do that for 1 minute, the way that can regulate your nervous system is huge. You know, and second is just bringing a lot of self-compassion. You know, the more that I've been learning about the physical implications of trauma, like what is really happening in our nervous system, you know, going into that fight, flight, or freeze, just having those awareness of, you know, I noticed it the last fire that we had here in Sonoma County last fall was, you know, my family got evacuated, and we were doing response work. And so it's like you're on the front lines while you're experiencing the collective trauma. And, you know, I noticed right away that I went into a freeze, and then I went into a flight. And I think just like learning about what is happening on a physiological level, like our nervous system has all these amazing tools to help us survive, and to bring awareness to it of like, you know, because I think without the awareness, just the kind of the overwhelm and shame can come in of like, of something that I noticed before is like when I was feeling my own activation during a collective trauma, of feeling like, why am I not being able to do as much as I normally am? And so like just having that awareness and bringing that self-compassion to ourselves, and that every single human on this planet is experiencing right now of collective trauma. Like this is a really challenging experience, and people who are on the front lines are also in this new reality, and they're going. And so if you're feeling extra tired or extra depleted, or like you're not able to connect to people in the same way, or you don't maybe feel like you're 100% yourself, like to just bring some compassion of that's normal, that we're, you know, that our bodies are going through such rapid changes and trying to reorient, you know, and this is super different than the fires of, you know, with the fire, like we knew that eventually they would be put out, and this is a much longer process. And so the impact on our adrenals and on you know, that constant kind of moving around in our nervous systems. So another tool that is really helpful, I've been learning a lot about somatic experiencing and just bringing some like physical body awareness as well, of noticing like when I am kind of in an activated space, and this is something that people on the front lines can do, of like, you know, just to come back to noticing the sensation in our body or noticing the breath, and something that can take just even just a few seconds. You know, we don't have to practice mindfulness in a super peaceful place. You know, that's an ideal. That's great if we're able to carve out time in the beginning, middle, or end of our day to sit and to be with ourselves. But, you know, my teachers and what I've learned is like the biggest spiritual practice is life. Like, how can we take all the tools that we learn when times are a little bit more calm and apply them to when we're interacting with people or we're having challenging experiences. And but I find that having that compassion, and especially that self-compassion for self while we're experiencing this, is a crucial piece. So
Thank you so much. So we did have a question from someone watching on Facebook who is curious what the effect of a hot shower with eucalyptus or like a warm bath with lavender has on the body. Who wants to take that one?
I'll take this one. Just making sure I'm unmuted. Can y'all hear me? Good. Yeah, it's actually, you know, we're talking about the same things that Jenny was sort of referring to, which is balancing the nervous system, right? So hot water, really hot water, has this profound impact on our circulatory system. So it dilates all of our blood vessels, promotes blood flow to our musculature, to our vital organs, and it gives us sensation of relaxation. Especially following a day where you've been like this all day and your muscles are contracted and you're afraid, or you're in that fight or flight response. By adding certain herbs, either internally or to your bath, you can really intensify that impact because of the sometimes just the smell, but then these things are being absorbed as well. Adding a couple of cups of Epsom salt to that hot bath relaxes the muscles even more. And then it comes back to that mind-body connection. If your body's relaxed, your mind will follow. And these are great practices right before bed, especially if you're having a difficult time sleeping.
I have another question for the panel. The first part is, how do you define trauma? And then the second part is, what is the difference between a traumatic event and trauma or PTSD?
Do you want to speak to that, Jenny, or do you want?
Sure. Yeah, a lot of the definitions and understanding of trauma, I look to some experts in the field of trauma that I really resonate with. Bessel van der Kolk being one. He has a really integrative approach and bringing in the whole mind-body connection to not only understanding trauma, but ways to help work with trauma and help release it from being held in the body, which is a big part of what we're doing at IHAN, is understanding that trauma is not just a mental health issue, that, you know, all of us know as integrative practitioners that it's the mind, body, spirit connection that is the staple of wellness and health in a being. And so, you know, his definition of trauma that I really resonate with is that, you know, that there's first the traumatic event, which I forget, one of you discussed that, like, it can be different for all people. Like a traumatic event for one person, like a car accident or an illness or a death of a loved one, or, you know, early childhood things, feeling neglected. Like there's such a wide variety of what a traumatic event can be, and it can impact people differently depending on the level of trauma that they have encountered throughout their life, especially if they've had a lot of early childhood trauma, which has a big impact on kind of like the possibility of how the new traumas will impact the, you know, so his definition, it's an incident that causes physical, emotional, spiritual, or psychological harm. And just because there's a traumatic incident doesn't necessarily mean that a person will experience trauma or PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, which is the mental health condition that they really identified after the Vietnam War, of people who have symptoms that are things like flashbacks and nightmares and severe anxiety and just being really, really impacted by the traumatic event. And so some of the tools that Bessel van der Kolk talks about is because the trauma is like, when a traumatic event happens, trauma comes up when we have an inability to cope with the traumatic event, when we feel helpless in the traumatic event. And so it diminishes our sense of self and our identity to be able to know that there is an end in sight. And so some of the recommendations that he gives, especially for COVID-19 right now, is to, and it's some of the same suggestions that have come from this panel, which I love, which is like, you know, when we're feeling helpless and like there's just chaos all around us, like to shift from like, okay, the external world, that we don't have a lot of control over what's happening. So to come back into like what we can control in our interior world right now. And so his suggestions are things like creating routine, like what you're talking about, Ladina, of like having a set wake up time, having a set sleeping time, scheduling, you know, movement. Like that's a big part of the suggestions he has for working with trauma is moving the body, moving energy. You know, volunteering is a great way to work with trauma because you're able to move. You're not just sitting stagnant. And so it's a little bit different now because we're not all able to go out and physically volunteer. We're doing a lot more virtual volunteering. And so suggestions of, you know, scheduling a time every day to do a yoga class or a dance class or Qigong or other modalities that are really focused on helping move energy in your body, but also coupled with creating some sort of semblance of structure and routine, scheduling time to call your loved ones, calling a friend, calling your family members. And so just because a traumatic event happens doesn't mean that we necessarily have to feel the impacts of trauma. And there's also the opportunity for a field of work that I am endlessly fascinated about, which is called post-traumatic growth, where when a traumatic event happens, instead of it leading just to PTSD, that post-traumatic growth is an opportunity for when a traumatic event happens, it evokes something inside a person and it ignites the resiliency that they have. And it actually opens up an opportunity to feel more clear about your purpose and who you are and in yourself, who you are with your community. Sorry, I got a little choked up about it because it's like, it can be really transformative. Like, and I think a lot of us are experiencing that right now too, with all the challenges of right now, of like, we're getting an opportunity to look at our society and also our own personal lives of like, what was working before COVID and how can we pivot and shift and use this traumatic event to create greater resiliency, greater clarity of like what we actually really care about in our individual lives. What do we care about in our families and in our communities? So it's a huge spectrum. And so what I find hopeful about it is that traumatic events are challenging and they're varying degrees, and you all have done such a great job of making sure to note that, like, if you need extra help right now, if you're feeling, you know, a lot of depression or anxiety, like, please reach out to a professional. There are so many providers who have such a wide variety of tools to share, from acupuncture, homeopathy, naturopathic medicine, talking to a clinical psychologist, like talking to a somatic therapist, working with people. We're so lucky to have such a wide variety of tools to help people through challenging times. And yeah, sure there's some other things I missed. Would love to hear what you ladies think
Well,
about.
Yes, so we have about 4 minutes left. So if you guys could finish up any final thoughts, and Ladina, go ahead and share. And then I just had a couple things to say at the end.
Mine's kind of short and boring. It's just to give some actual structure to those definitions for folks. So like in terms of time. So acute stress disorder, we're really thinking about like the event, right? And having some stress or issues arise about 3 days that could last up to a month or so. And then we start the recovery process. Something of note is about half of those folks could go on to develop PTSD from that experience, which is a quite alarmingly large number. So we really encourage people to get help soon in the acute stress moment. The other one is called adjustment disorder. That's after about 3 months are passed, like the loss of a loved one, something like this. 3 months have gone by and you still don't feel quite right. Generally speaking, that's where you need a little more help too from providers and support. And then this PTSD thing really starts to pop in around that 6-month mark where things just really haven't gotten back to normal. And then the severity of the symptoms, I think Jenny sort of already touched on with PTSD. I just wanted to give some of those timeframes for folks to think about.
Thank you so much for that. So we only have a couple minutes left. So I just wanted to thank all of you for participating in this panel. I think, you guys are all amazing practitioners. I'm so grateful to have you in IHAN. Your work with us is all specifically around transforming trauma into resiliency for communities that are affected by disaster. Our community has just grown by an entire world, so I'm excited for what we can offer. Thank you guys so much for being volunteers. A reminder to everyone who's watching this, we're always looking for more volunteers, both practitioners and administrative volunteers in whatever capacity you have. You can find us on Integrative Healers Action Network.org. That's where you can sign up to be a volunteer with our organization. We are going to be doing these panels every Thursday at 12 p.m. Pacific. And then starting next week, we'll have our free virtual clinic. So thank you guys so much for reminding people to reach out to professionals. This is the time that people can start that healing process. So we'll be having those free clinics with our volunteer practitioners on Thursdays from 2 to 4 Pacific. There'll be plenty of information on our Facebook page. And I will also, as I was listening to you guys talk, I'll go ahead and post some free apps. We talked a lot about free apps that are available. So I'll go ahead and put a collection of those free apps up on our Facebook page. And then also there's tons of artists, when we talk about music, there's tons of artists that are doing free concerts, free jam sessions. So I'll put up some of those things as well as resources for the community. Jenny, did you have anything you wanted to share in closing?
Just a lot of gratitude for our volunteers. We're so blessed to have such an amazing community of practitioners who have stepped up since day one in the 2017 fires. And so this would not be possible without such a wide variety of really heart-driven, compassionate beings. And yeah, we're excited to see how we can continue to create virtual offerings to support our communities here, not only in California, but beyond. I think it's exciting to see the scope of reach that we can be working towards. So, yeah.
Thank you to you all. I really appreciate each one of you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. See you next time.